poetry it's a way of expression. It's a form of creative writing that, traditionally someone spoke it to you, either you read it or someone read it to you just like I did. And these days you have technology that allows you to see it and hear it on video or on CD. I started to write in 2004. Before that, my background is actually in music. And so before that I was writing songs and singing and all of that. And in 2004 there was an event that happened, and I found I couldn't express it in music. I couldn't write a song, verse, chorus, and have it work. And so it was at that point that I kind of switched and started to write poems. And I was in university at the time, so I studied it and tried to kind of grow in the craft. Now I didn't feel like now I've become a poet until maybe 2009. I'm the one who discovers as I go along how empowering or how much of an impact poetry and the arts can have. I'm as surprised as anyone else, really. So in 2010, I published a book. It was called Blue Mother Tongue. And just last month, a CD, which is called Introducing Ngwatilo, which is now playing on the radio. It's very lovely to hear yourself on the radio. I've been asked to speak about how my art form, how empowerment can come through my art form. And I'm a writer, so I have to look at my notes, because otherwise it will not work. Poetry is a way of knowing, fundamentally. There's an example that I wanted to give. When they discover the cure for AIDS, right, it'll be new knowledge. It'll be something that we did not previously know. In the same way, and not all the time, but sometimes the poems that we write and the art that we create allows us to see ourselves and the people who see it, allows us to see the world in a whole new way that we didn't know before. And it is knowledge. It is as important, not saying, it is as important and as valid as that. It's also a way to record and communicate an idea for either instruction or reflection. And I have to say, my life and the path that I've chosen has changed because of the work that I started to do with poetry. Back in 2006, I won a fellowship at my university to spend 2 months with a mentor, an established poet, and really do an exposition and write 20-something poems it was. And I chose to write about home. And at that time, I was living in the US. I had a scholarship to go study there. And so home, I discovered, was this thing that I didn't know. So I ended up writing about the lack of, my lack of knowledge of, and starting with not knowing my mother tongues, going into not knowing what the rest of the country is about, going into lineage and all these issues. And it forced me to, I rejected that. It made me very upset to not have a positive kind of knowing of my place. And so it's kind of set me on this path to kind of discover things and create a path for myself, a history, and discover it, really. So it started with going around and really examining life in the diaspora and then life in Nairobi, because this is where I grew up. And then now it's going to the rest of the country, because this is my place. And if I don't know it, who will? Or whose responsibility is it to know it? In terms of the city of Nairobi, 6 years ago, there was nothing happening in terms of poetry at all. And the Kwani Trust, I think, had just started at the time. And what they used to do, they started a reading, and there was no one to read. There was actually no one who would get up and read a poem or a story or whatever it was. And so they read the book. And over time, it grew from that one group into people actually starting to get up and read their own work, into now there's 2 events, 3 events, and as of last year there was like 10 events. And so thousands of people are impacted by the idea that we have selves to express, actually want to express themselves and actually want to say things. And I believe it's going to impact our the real world in terms of activism and all of this. In fact, one of the poets who I met through that forum is sitting at the back of the bench. Hey, Mukesh. I should, but it is about that constant writing and rewriting and editing, really. It's also about reading other people. Boniface was talking about the impact that someone's book had on his life. And I have to say, on my writing and my thinking about writing, it's as much poets and it's also people thinking about culture, thinking about place, and the things that I care about as well. And the reason that, I think part of the reason we say write every day, or people say write every day, is because it's the only way you kind of get to the bottom of yourself. I think when you start to write, you start with very glossy, top, surface things about what's important, and it's really rubbish most of the time. You just have to accept that. But when you start to feel comfortable with yourself with a pen, you get to some really golden stuff. Like, really, everyone in this room has something or says things in a different way. Like, everyone in this, it's not cliche, everyone in this room is unique. And there's a way of seeing that you see that no one else does, But we always start with the cliche. We always start with the things that we hear other people say as if they are what is acceptable. But really, there is unique thought in your mind, and you just have to kind of work to get at it. There's a quote that I've carried with me. I may not have it exactly, but it's by Robert Pinsky, who's like a really major poet. And he says, the work of the poet is to mediate between the dead and the unborn. And I'm carrying that with me, especially with this new project of going around the country, because I feel like Kenyans don't know each other. Is this true or not? Do we know each other? Okay, good. So I don't have to tell you how even Rafael Tuju, President's advisor, was like last year. You remember when there was so much happening with the constitutional, when we were voting the constitution in? And it's like, there is no Kenya. It's a geographic phenomena, right? This is the President's advisor. At the same time, you go to Samburu, and there's a pastoralist there, and he's like, so, how is Kenya? And you're like, we're in the same country, yeah? And I think it's a great tragedy of this, tragedy and opportunity of this moment. And it also runs with age. How many people talk to their grandmothers or have their grandmothers talk to them and really tell them, you know how they, in the 60s and 70s, or the books that were written around then, they would tell you about sitting around the fire, and there's no day my grandfather told me any of those stories. And it took me going to him and him thinking, okay, why is this relevant to your life? Your life is about the internet and, globalization and all of this. That past is not relevant to you. And it's me telling him, yes, it is. And I think the reason that I'm doing this work is so that people believe that it is important, that you believe it's important, that your grandpeople believe it's important, so that we can actually go forth into the world knowing who we are and why we are here and what next.